Let's talk about creating an environment for your story and the kind of technique and artwork that goes into building that world. Let me share my screen and here we go. All right. So, concept art is a way of describing the kind of preliminary illustration that's used to develop a story. So, one of my favorites is Ryan Church. And here we have a scene from episode three, that final duel between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader. So, everything in this concept piece helped develop the idea for that entire beautiful scene held on Mustafar. Here's one that Ryan did for Mandalorian. Sets the tone, sets the scene of that first season of Mandalorian, and gives us a picture of what the world looks like. So Ryan is a professional concept artist and has worked for Lucasfilm for many years. And I love looking at his work to get ideas and to learn about technique in world building. So here are some other illustrations that he made for episode three. Here you have the Wookiee planet and what's going on. What's always fun when you look at these pictures is to think that the illustrator is the person who comes in at the very beginning, who takes a look at a scene or part of the script and is hired to develop that idea, to pre-visualize that idea before anything has been created. And that's a really influential part of the process to be able to take your art and develop that idea. So I am sure that this was used at an early stage with George Lucas to help develop the scene and to picture what would be happening in the story and to help convey to the other artists that would be working later in the future how to build and construct the universe, whether it's the sets or the digital sets or the props or to develop other ideas. So here's tip number one from Ryan's work to describe how you should work as a concept artist and what you should be doing to develop your story. And eventually, or essentially, story comes first. Show, don't tell. Your art should tell the story. We should be able to see very quickly what's happening and understand the context from that image where we are in the story. Maybe it's something that's going to surprise us, or maybe it's something that's going to excite us, but it doesn't matter. But that image needs to grab your attention and tell you something important. For example, here's the foundation of the Death Star. Also, look at this. The whole scene sets the mood for Darth Vader. I mean, literally, he's in hell. Uh, we know now because of the prequels, his own, backstory. We know how he lives this hellish existence based on the regret and the terrible things that occurred in his life. Well, of course, you're going to design a set, you're going to design a scene that emphasizes that as a part of his development. Another tip, you really need to focus on your horizon line. You're painting a picture of a place and you're illustrating something that has to have some reality to it. So it needs to follow the rules of perspective. And that horizon is what sets our eyes on the scene and helps us understand where we fit, even as an audience member. So here you have a scene. I believe this one is from John Carter, that little known movie out there about John Carter's adventures on Mars. Movie didn't do that well, but I thought it was decent. But in any case, here Ryan is developing the layout for the Mars, the desert, and the population that lives there, and there are all kinds of interesting visual cues as to where we are. But it's very clear the size and context because of the horizon. We can tell where we fit if we were there. Here's another view from, I believe, episode three as well, where you have this walker coming through this mushroom jungle on this alien planet. It might be that scene leading up to Alia Segura's death, deep cut. So here we have, that worm's eye view looking upward and seeing that walker menacing coming forward in this alien world. It's kind of fun. Use perspective intentionally. We've got the 1 point and the 2 point and the 3 point perspective in our back pocket, and we can use that to develop our scene and develop our story. So if you don't know perspective, learn it. and learn how to use it effectively to create context, size, scale, everything you need for your story and the elements in it. Here's one Ryan did of Avatar. And this is that scene when the bulldozer's coming forward, tearing down the trees and going for the main characters. And of course, we're in a 1 point perspective view right now, and that increases the drama, increases the danger because we see that bulldozer coming at us. And of course, everything points back to that danger. And then very small in the front, even though the Navi are big, they look small and they're afraid of that big bulldozer coming at them. And that's all emphasized by the perspective, the 1 point perspective. Here's kind of a more obscure, but it's more of a 3 point perspective because it's showing us the size and scale of what we're looking up at. Because these trees in this jungle is such a dramatic size, we have to look very small, and we're down below looking up, which means that in 3 point view, everything points toward multiple vantage points, and that it's kind of hard to tell in an organic form, but it warps our view. And so this really emphasizes what's happening. And you can kind of see the little silhouette in the foreground of the one Navi character, the other one small up at the top, kind of falling down. That increases that feeling of depth. So speaking of depth, layer your layout. Add a foreground, midground, and a background element so that your layout, your environment has depth to it. So here's a kind of a little trick. You see here how the soldiers and the walker are coming toward us. Well, you have certain foreground elements that are closer to us and they're more developed. Then you have stuff in the midground, like the walker and the soldiers next to him. And then stuff in the very far background, which are the trees and the jungle, and they're kind of diffused in the light. Well, that helps create the depth of the scene and helps us understand that, there's a distance here and there's a size and scale that we're looking at. If everything was done at the same size or the incorrect proportion and wasn't shown in shadow or highlight, this picture would be flat. And a lot of beginners do that. They don't pay attention to the rules of space and size and scale, and they don't pay attention to that foreground, midground, background dimension, and their artwork doesn't work right. So they don't size their characters correctly for the scene, or they don't size the buildings or the organic elements to the scene. So we have to pay attention to that to make sure that everything looks realistic. Here's another example, and this one's kind of an action scene, and you can see how they've arranged everything in a way that makes us kind of swirl around the picture. We see the hero up front on the Banshee flying toward us, and then of course the little helicopters following after. And what's nice is there's like a swooping line that kind of comes through the image. You can see them coming forward. We have 1, 2, 3. And that's another way to think about foreground, midground, and background is that 1, 2, 3 level. Split up your picture into those 3 units in terms of depth and size and scale, and you'll have a nice balanced image. And in a situation like this, it really helps develop what's happening and showing us through that differentiation what to look at first and what to look at last. Along with that, you can emphasize that even more by creating atmosphere. So there's another little trick for using light and dark tones. You might think that something that's closer to us might be brighter, but actually, if you're looking at atmosphere, a lot of times what really is far distant is faded and it looks lighter, especially when looking at the sky, except at night, of course. But what we're doing is we're trying to create that depth through atmosphere. And so color tends to shift and get lighter. Things in the background recede and get smaller. Of course, those things closest to us, especially when in shadow, can be really differentiated by making them darker. So this is a good value study of how to develop that idea by splitting the light, dark, and medium tones. It's also indicated here by what you see with this, background that's faded up atop. You see the size of the buildings. You see the like what do you call it? The mist coming down. The things closest to us are darkest. Sorry, a little technical difficulty there. Back at it. So we're looking at this atmosphere scene that's developed with the light and dark. And so again, emphasize your background colors in a lighter tone to allow them to feel like they're distant in space. And things come forward as they get darker. That contrast is a good way to balance out your picture. Embellish the architecture. So use shape, repetition, and rhythm. Use architectural features in that way to really show and develop your culture. So here are some examples from Ryan's portfolio about this ancient, what looks like kind of a Roman or classic architecture. You can see the columns and the domes and the rounded shapes. And what really gives us that indication of what we're looking at, or at least the culture, are those ships in the foreground. So we see this nice balanced image where we have a clear, consistent scale. We have that large pyramid-shaped mountain in the back, and then kind of that medium, larger structure, that round Colosseum style. And then down closer in the foreground are the bright sails sailing on the water. This is a nice example of using architecture as well. When you're developing a culture, you definitely want to use something that visibly represents who they are and what they're about. And that can be kind of fun in storytelling to try to create that uniqueness so that when you see that culture, you know that that culture is consistent. Also, if you're trying to make something look like it's ancient or futuristic or in the real world or contemporary, it's a real challenge. And so you want to really balance out little elements and symbols and styles that really represent what you're looking at. If you don't do that, then your picture doesn't really convey a clear story. Apply the rule of thirds. This one comes up all the time in all kinds of illustration scenarios. The rule of thirds is the way to balance a picture with asymmetry. And you'll notice that in a lot of background illustrations or layout illustrations, they're not really trying to do a centered pyramid style illustration. Instead, they use the rule of thirds to make things off center, asymmetrical. That creates a nice storytelling view that feels a little bit more candid and less composed. But it's also a very strong and solid positioning. For example, having, Mando reaching out to touch little Grogu's finger. Obviously, rule of thirds, left-handed side, L-shaped or reverse L-shaped composition. So lead the eye. It's important that every element in your picture point the viewer where you want them to look. Of course, sometimes if you're developing a really elaborate background, you might have many things to look at, and that's fun. But you need to have a hierarchy so that you show your viewer what you want them to see. Here's a cool example of the way they staged this with the large Krayt dragon and the bantha and the sand people and everyone in the foreground dealing with this danger. I love how the dragon's tail and back kind of weaves through in that serpentine view through the picture, leading up to its dangerous teeth, or leading us back down to the people in the foreground trying to figure out a way to attack and survive. Of course, this one is a good example. You see Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting, where everything points back down to what we want to see and what we're looking for. So here you've got the color, the stalactites, the stalagmites, all that stuff pointing out what we're looking at. So that we see that light, that bright light of the lava. Of course, that central spot where they cross their lightsabers really is the brightest spot in the picture, and everything else kind of points down to it. And then, of course, it's framed by these dark elements on those those craggy walls on the sides. Next thing you need to do is provide some visual context. If you're doing something otherworldly, especially where your viewer isn't going to recognize or understand the culture or the size and scale of things, you need to show something to help them understand. So in this picture, for example, how do we know how large the space is? How do we know how large the characters are that live in this world? Well, we need to show them. We need to show them in the picture so that we see that immediate representation of who they are and what they look like. It may not seem like a big deal, but it's definitely something that helps the viewer relate to what they're seeing, is to see that comparison between the size and scale of elements. So you always want to, you know, put in a little character in there somehow so people see who they are and how they relate. And of course, in this situation, right, everybody knows how big Yoda is. So once you know that, you can then extrapolate what you're looking at and how large it is. It's an important little cue that you give your viewer. So always look for ways to add little elements that they recognize so that they know what they're seeing. Last but not least is light the space. So here we're looking to use light and color and temperature and value to again create the story. So here we have a futuristic scene that we can tell is a futuristic scene because the lighting is not natural. It doesn't look like something that we see commonly in our world. It looks advanced and interesting and different. And we can tell because it's in complete contrast with the background, which has kind of a normal sunset. But then here in the foreground, we have those cold tones and that fluorescent looking light. So now we know, oh, I'm looking at something futuristic. So that's an important cue to give your audience to tell them the time and place immediately by how it's lit. Same with this scenario. We can tell that it's natural light exposed from maybe these illuminated gems or maybe these sunlights up at the top or a cave entrance. This feels like a dwarf world. And so we can tell it's in the past. There isn't electric light. There's more flames and other magical light, but that helps us understand time and place. So use that to effect to tell your story and embrace what is actually happening in the scene. So if there are objects that have electric light, show that. If it's not and it's more natural, let the natural light live and breathe the way it should. So those are my ideas and my tips that I gather while looking at the different uh, concept artists that I admire and looking at ways to tell and build a world. And so what you're looking for are all those different kinds of cues to elaborate on your artwork and your backgrounds. Personally, my favorite thing to draw are people and characters. I've always struggled when drawing things and objects and places. I don't enjoy that. But it's very important to understand how to do it because it's going to make your story better. All right. Hope that helps. See you next time.